Apple's budget MacBook is said to be coming back. You see, the last non-Air, non-Pro MacBook that Apple sold was this guy, the 2017 12-inch MacBook, which was discontinued in 2019. But after 6 years, it may actually be coming back. So here are 11 rumors and speculations about what and when we should expect it. But before that, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Paper-like. Paper-like screen protectors turn your slippery display into a paper-like surface, which is perfect for writing or drawing whilst also preventing scratches. And compared to Apple's nano-texture option, Paper-like screen protector is a no-brainer. It feels better, it costs significantly less, and you also don't need to pay for that 1 TB of storage option to get it. And I should also add that a nano-texture is super scratch-prone, which doesn't apply to Paper-like. Plus, you can replace Paper-like whenever you want to, unlike the nano texture. So check out Paper-like by using the link below. First off, let's see when these rumors started. Analyst Ming-Chi Kuo and MacRumors have first spotted evidence of such a device in some backend code related to Apple Intelligence last summer, with the identifier MacBook 17.1. Now, that's a bit odd, considering that the last MacBook, the 12-inch model from 2017, used the identifier MacBook 10.1. Now, these numbers usually go up sequentially, so you would expect something like 11.1 instead. However, all Macs that shipped with a variant of the M4 chip had an identifier stating 16. So, for example, 16.1 for the base 14-inch MacBook Pro, all the way up to 16.13 for the 15-inch MacBook Air. And following that logic, jumping all the way to 17.1 would actually make perfect sense for a newer generation Mac. At number 2, we have the performance, and this is where things get really interesting. Because according to Ming-Chi Kuo, this new MacBook will actually use not an M chip, but an A iPhone chip. Yes, a MacBook running macOS on an iPhone chip. It is expected to have the A18 Pro from the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. But why would Apple use an iPhone chip in a MacBook? Surely it will be significantly slower compared to even the M2 or even the M1. Well, actually, the A18 Pro has a multi-core performance that's similar to the M1. And the even more important aspect, the single core in Geekbench, is actually on par or even better than the M3. On top of this, it also features the AV1 decoder found in the M3 and M4 chips, and it is also expected to come with either 8 gigs of RAM or up to 16 gigs of RAM. There are two possible directions here. Apple may stick with 8 gigs of RAM, as the A18 Pro was only ever paired with 8 gigs of RAM, but fun fact, the A12Z in the Apple Silicon Transition Kit, a Mac Mini running the iPad's A12Z chip, was the only A-series chip ever to be paired with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Which takes us to the second possibility, that they will continue the trend that they started with the M4, where the minimum amount of RAM was bumped to 16 gigabytes in order to be better suited and more future-proofed for Apple Intelligence. In fact, Apple even went back and updated their older M2 and M3 MacBook Airs that they were still selling to start with 16 gigabytes of RAM by default, a very rare and unexpected move from them. Now, personally, I do believe that they may stick with 8 gigabytes of RAM for the first generation at least, just to have a more differentiating factor between this new MacBook and then the MacBook Air. Or they could simply have the design be a differentiating factor. Speaking of which, we haven't had any rumors about the design of this new base MacBook, but it could be the case that it will either reuse the M1's MacBook Air design with that wedge-shaped chassis, as Apple usually does with their budget and entry-level devices, like the iPhone SE line, where they reuse the design where they had already spent R&D money on. Or another alternative would be the new flat design that was introduced with the M2 MacBook Air. Maybe, just maybe, with the older style of screen, with thicker bezels and no notch, just to set it apart from the Air in some design, shape, or form. And I guess we could also consider a third option, which is a thinner version of the current MacBook Air's design. After all, the 12-inch MacBook was noticeably thinner than the MacBook Air at that time. In fact, this is also how we designed the new MacBook Air in our concept. The same design as the current Air, only with a thinner chassis. And yeah, this looked really cool, although if I were to place a bet, I would probably bet on the same MacBook Air design as we've got now. Especially when we consider that the MacBook Air will be getting a redesign around 2027 to 2028, and when that happens, this base MacBook would then automatically have an outdated design, and it will look inferior to the then new Air. Anyways, these are just speculations. As for the display, it is expected to have a 13-inch screen with a Retina resolution. And I'm fairly confident that it will offer a lower brightness compared to the current MacBook Air, which sits at 500 nits. For reference, the M1 MacBook Air topped out at 400 nits. Even if Apple goes with the newer display design with slimmer, uniform bezels and the notch, I do expect them to limit the brightness to 400 nits, even if that's in software, to have some distinction from the Air lineup. Okay, at number 5, we even have some leaks on the new colors that it may use. Analyst Ming Chi Kuo reported on X that this new budget MacBook may come in 4 colors: silver, blue, pink, and yellow. Do these sound familiar to you? Well, if that's the case, that's probably because these are the exact same colors that Apple already uses for their budget iPad lineup, the 10th and 11th generation. And it does make perfect sense. Apple tends to use more vibrant colors for their entry-level devices to appeal to their younger users and attract a broader audience. Also, you can probably tell that we've matched all of our MacBook colors here with a wallpaper that perfectly suits that color. And these are all part of our new Gradient Glow Pack by our designer Arif from our app Wallpapers. It's got 10 beautiful gradient designs, all available in 1x1 8K, so that you can use them on your smartphone, tablet, and desktop. Feel free to use the link down below, or simply just search for Wallpapers in the App Store or Play Store. Now, back to these vibrant MacBook colors. If Apple does indeed go with these colors, then they would perfectly match the current MacBook lineup, with the entry-level MacBooks and the iPads having bold and playful colors, then the mid-range Air lineup having more refined colors like sky blue, starlight, silver, and midnight, or purple in the case of the iPad Air. And then we would have the Pro lineup where we get the usual silver and black. But what do you guys think? Would you buy a MacBook that comes in these vibrant colors? Let me know down below. So what about the port selection? Well, again, there have been no leaks or rumors on this, but I'm thinking that if it uses the M1 MacBook Air chassis, it would almost certainly have the same ports. So 2 USB-C 3.2 ports running at 10 gigabits per second, although no Thunderbolt, as the A18 Pro does not have a Thunderbolt controller. However, if it adopts the new M2 Air's design, it may come with a MagSafe and either 1 or 2 USB-C ports, plus, of course, a headphone jack. At number 7, let's talk about the amount of storage that this new budget MacBook is likely to come with. You see, even though the A18 Pro was paired with 128GB of storage in the iPhone 16 Pro, this may just be way too low even for a budget laptop. Plus, Apple has not shipped a MacBook with 128GB of storage since 2019, so I'm almost certain that it will have 256GB of storage as the base. But I've got a feeling that there will be a catch, likely a cost-saving measure for Apple, which is that the base model may only come with one single 256GB NAND chip instead of 2 128 ones. This will be cheaper to produce, but the only downside, of course, will be significantly slower storage speeds. We saw this with the M2 MacBook Air, where Apple was just using one chip, resulting in read and write speeds of around 1500 megabytes per second, or around half of what the M3, M4, and even the M1 models had, which all used 2-chip configurations. So what about that battery life? Well, that's one of the big advantages of using an iPhone chip. They're even more efficient than Apple's M-series chips, which means that this new MacBook could have an insane battery life. But here's the thing, I don't think Apple wants to outshine the MacBook Air. Right now, the Air offers up to 18 hours of battery life, and if this new MacBook uses the same sized battery, it may easily beat that, but I don't think Apple wants that. So my guess is that it will have a smaller battery than the MacBook Air, maybe even in that thinner chassis that we theorized in our concept. So okay, what will Apple call this new MacBook? Some reports suggest that it may be named the MacBook SE, but honestly, I do doubt it. Apple has a very strong recognizable name for this entry-level MacBook already, which is simply MacBook. And also, let's not forget that Apple has been moving from that SE branding altogether. If we take a look at the iPhone 16e, it's not called the iPhone SE4, but just iPhone 16e. At number 10, we have the price, and this is a bit of a tricky one. You see, the M4 MacBook Air starts at $999, although you can already find it for $849 on Amazon, being on sale almost all the time, so it needs to be cheaper than that. Also, you may not notice, but in the US, Walmart has been selling the M1 MacBook Air for $649 for a few years now. So this MacBook could be a replacement for that, and Apple may aim for a price of $649 to $799, which would fit perfectly in their lineup. Also, the M4 Mac Mini starts from $599, so $649 would actually make a lot of sense for a MacBook that's got, of course, more expensive components inside, like a screen, a battery, a keyboard, trackpad, and more, although it does come with a weaker chip. So when are we expecting to see this new budget MacBook? Well, analyst Ming Chi Kuo reported that we are likely to see it in the last quarter of this year, or the first quarter of 2026, which would line up perfectly with an Apple Spring event. That's because Apple usually releases their budget and entry-level devices at spring events, like the iPhone SE and the iPhone 16e and all the other budget iPads from the 5th generation onward. And since the M5 MacBooks are said to have been delayed to early next year anyways, I do expect a Mac-focused event maybe in March of 2026. But what do you guys think? Do you think this could be a hit for Apple? Honestly, I was expecting a reincarnation of the 12-inch MacBook. I just love that design so much, and I think that would just be perfect today, thanks to Apple Silicon. And for that kind of use, what do people want? They want a long battery life and a fast, snappy experience, and this MacBook would deliver just that. Sure, it probably won't be ideal for heavy workloads, especially if it's fanless, but for everyday tasks, I think it will be great. I can already see it becoming my go-to recommendation for my friends or family. Just like how I've been suggesting the M4 base Mac Mini to anyone looking for a solid desktop at a great price. Drop a like down below if you're also excited for a new budget MacBook, and with this being said, stay tuned for more MacBook and Apple news as soon as we've got them. Check out our app wallpapers for some amazing designs for your Mac. I'm Daniel, this is ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.